Thank you for your prayers for me. My forecast of what would happen at the wedding was close, but we had some new lines and words, and my mother joined Carolyn in coaching me. Um, so anyway, and by the way, we'll move on. By the way, thanks to Lynn and Doug, they have been trying to help me with my humor. And so Lynn sends me a joke yesterday that said Moses was the first man to download a message on a tablet from the cloud. And I know. And then Doug wanted to wish everybody happy Cinco de Marcho. And I'm like, if I need help for humor and it's that, I have big problems. Yes, sir. Get into the Bible. All right, we are closing out the book of Numbers, and this has been an incredible book for me. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. I learn a lot every time I teach a book of the Bible, and we'll be moving to the New Testament. Just to give you a little bit of a history, this book, the Hebrews called Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. And in the Hebrew Bible, what they do, every book is entitled with the first words of the book. And so for them, this is all about being in the wilderness. And even though we conclude today, they will continue to be, in essence, outside the promised land, poised to go in. So you wonder, well, why do we call it Numbers? Well, the Greek translation ended up being arithmoi. That makes sense, right? Arithmetic. And the Latin version took arithmoi and made it numeri, where we get numbers, plural numbers. And the numbers refer to the census that takes place at the beginning of the book and the census that we've just studied. Last week, we know that there were 2.5 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, that decided to stay on the wrong side of the Jordan River, outside the promised land. And it was at that point that Moses had his conniption, where he basically said, you want to stay here while your brothers go and fight. There would have been 111,000 warriors that would have stayed on that side of the river out of the 600,000 that should go fight. And so they said, no, we'll go. We'll be the point of the spear. In fact, we'll lead our brothers to go. And they did end up leading their brothers. Ultimately, in the book of Joshua, Yehoshua, which means Yeshua, which means Jesus, will lead them across the Jordan River into the promised land. Now, today we come to a really neat concept called cities of refuge. That's my email yesterday, needing refuge. I still need refuge if anybody will offer it. These cities of refuge, you hear today the concept of sanctuary cities, and I'm not going to get into politics. That's not the purpose. But the sanctuary cities that we have today actually draw their inspiration from the cities of refuge. The cities of refuge were God's provision as it relates to the sanctity of life. And sanctuary cities, although it's a slightly different purpose, rather than protecting somebody, it's actually not cooperating with laws of the land. So there are two different things, and we shouldn't get them confused. And regardless of where you are in immigration, I'm not going to take a stand. This is a really neat concept. So let's kick off. Catherine.
The Lord spoke to Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho, saying, command the people of Israel to give to the Levites some of the inheritance of their possession as cities for them to dwell in. And you shall give to the Levites pasture land around the cities. The cities shall be theirs to dwell in, and their pasture lands shall be for their cattle and for their livestock and for all of their beasts. The pasture land of the cities which you shall give to the Levites shall reach from the wall of the city outward 1,000 cubits all around, and you shall measure outside the city on the east side 2,000 cubits, and on the south side 2,000 cubits, and on the west side 2,000 cubits, and on the north side 2,000 cubits. The city being in the middle. This shall belong to them as pasture land for their cities. The cities that you give to the Levites shall be the 6 cities of refuge, where you shall permit the manslayer to flee, and in addition to them you shall give 42 cities. All the cities that you give to the Levites shall be 48, with their pasture lands. And as for the cities that you shall give from the possession of the people of Israel, from the large tribes you shall take many, and from the smaller tribes you shall take few. Each in proportion to the inheritance that it inherits shall give of its cities to the Levites.
So once again, the Levites aren't going to be given any land. The 12 other tribes are going to be allotted land based on lots and based on the size and of the census that they took. The Levites at the last census, there are 23,000 males over 1 month old, which means there's probably 46,000 Levites that are going in, men and women and children. And they are going to occupy these 48 cities, which means each of these cities is going to have roughly 950 people. So these are small little cities. And the houses at this point in time were basically 4-room houses. And it was very, very common. Even in Egypt, it was very common. It was a relatively larger room combined with like 3 closets. I won't even call it a room. And 3 generations would live in these 4-bedroom houses, and they'd be stacked side by side, and around the city would be walls for protection. And outside these walls, you have 1,000 cubits, which takes us back to when Bill Cosby was funny, and God's talking to him about building an ark, and he's like, all right, what's a cubit? And so a cubit is 18 inches. And so this would have been 500 yards out from each of the walls. So this up here is not actually accurate. And I know you're always saying, why do you always bring in things that aren't accurate? But when it's talking about 1,000 cubits and 2,000 cubits, it's talking about the breadth and the distance from the wall. And if you imagine a little town of 950 people, it actually would look more like a cross, not a cross of Jesus, but like the Red Cross. You would have something that was this side, and you would have go out 1,000 yards and 2,000 across, and it would look like a cross. And so they're going to set up these cities of refuge all around Israel. A city of refuge needed to be within a day's run for anybody in the land. So ultimately, these cities of refuge are going to be both on the east side of the Jordan and on the west side. And they had to be well marked. There was no mountain or river that someone would have to climb or cross. And the roads would be well groomed, and they would be twice as wide as a normal road. And there had to be signs posted along the way that said refuge. And the whole thing was to protect someone, to protect a manslayer. The whole thing. And we go back and why do you need to protect a manslayer? A manslayer could be somebody that killed someone by accident. In Deuteronomy, there's actually a case where somebody is chopping wood, the axe head comes off, and it kills somebody. And that's not murder. And so there is accidental death, there is 2 people fighting, and then ultimately there's just all out murder. And so the manslayer has to run from blood vengeance. There wasn't a sheriff. I shot the sheriff. There was no sheriff of the day. There's no police. It was an obligation of all people to redeem their kinsman. If somebody kills my brother, I'm going to kill them. Everything functioned that way. Everything was vengeance. And not only were you supposed to kill your brother or kill the killer of your brother, you were obligated to kill. You were obligated to kill. So this is a blood vengeance society. It's the same all across the Middle East. It was the same in America. I mean, all the way up until the 1800s. Remember the Hatfields and McCoys? And if you've seen some of those movies about that, one of the early things that happened that began to trigger the Hatfield and McCoys, so West Virginia and Kentucky, these 2 families was a dispute over a hog. And one thing led to another, and eventually one side is surrounding a house with children shooting into it and lighting the house on fire. That's what blood vengeance is. And so these cities of refuge are God's plan to prevent that. That was the whole scheme. So the Levites were not apportioned land. And for the third time, the reason that they weren't apportioned land, and for our visitors, is you go back in time. There was a period of time where Jacob lived in a place called Shechem. And the prince of Shechem was actually named Shechem, and he was the son of Hamor. And he raped Jacob's daughter, Leah's daughter, named Dinah. He took her and raped her. No question, the Bible talks about him defiling her. That's what happened. And the brothers of Jacob, or excuse me, the sons of Jacob were outraged, totally outraged. Well, all of a sudden, this prince, Shechem, goes to his father and he said, you know what? I actually want to marry Dinah. I want to marry her. And so can you somehow make all this right? So he goes to Jacob and he says, look, I'll give you, you name the price. Whatever you want to do, you name the price. And we want our daughters to marry your sons and your daughters to marry our sons. We'll come together and be as one. And Jacob's sons go to them and they say, look, because you're uncircumcised, we can't do any of this. And it was just a big trick. And 3 days later, when they are recovering, after they've been circumcised, for some reason they agreed to do this. And after 3 days, they're laying around. Simeon and Levi come in and kill every single person, except for the women and children, and they take them as hostage and they steal everything. And it was a great source of lost face for Jacob, not endorsing or saying that rape was okay. He was saying that's excessive. That is the definition of overkill. And so he was embarrassed. And on his deathbed, he basically said, Levi, you'll never inherit any of the land. And Simeon, you will be spread. All of you will be spread and not have any land. Simeon, from the last census, was the smallest tribe, and it was subsumed into Judah. Levi is here. Now you're like, well, Levi, that seems to be an honor to have God as your inheritance. And that's because at the incident of the golden calf, when they come down and Moses and Joshua's like, man, I hear war. And Moses is like, that's not war. And they're literally, all this conversation is going on. They're still running around wild. After multiple conversations are going on while the children of Israel are out of control. And it actually refers to Aaron letting them get out of control. And Moses says, who's on the Lord's side? And the Levites come up. They take their swords and he said, go to and fro, kill your brother, kill everyone. Now, when he's saying kill everyone, he's obviously talking about the ones that are running around wild. And from that moment, the Levites replaced the firstborn, and God became their inheritance. So this is the setup for the cities of refuge. This is why they're spread around, and let's go through a little bit more detail.
And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall select cities to be cities of refuge for you, that the manslayer who kills any person without intent may flee there. The city shall be for you a refuge from the avenger, that the manslayer may not die until he stands before the congregation for judgment. And the cities that you give shall be your 6 cities of refuge. You shall give 3 cities beyond the Jordan and 3 cities on the land of Canaan to be cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall be for refuge for the people of Israel and for the stranger and for the sojourner among them, that anyone who kills any person without intent may flee there. But if he struck them down with an iron object so that he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. And if he struck him down with a stone tool that could cause death and he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. Or if he struck him down with a wooden tool that could cause death and he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall be put to death. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death. When he meets him, he shall put him to death. And if he pushes him out of hatred or hurled something at him, lying in wait so that he died, or in enmity struck him down with his hand so that he died, when he who struck the blow shall be put to death. He is a murderer. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when he meets him.
Okay. So you kill somebody and you need protection. You flee to a city of refuge. You're going to be inside the city walls. These are the Levites, and presumably the Levites would have been the best to place judgment. This is about due process. And so they have a trial. They'll have witnesses, they'll have a trial, and they'll decide, is he a murderer? Or was this an accident? Is this manslaughter? What is this? And the avenger of blood, who is the next of kin, who is the Goel, remember the word Goel from the story of Ruth, the kinsman redeemer? So the Goel is the avenger of blood here. And if it's determined that this was murder, they're going to hand him over to the avenger of blood, and the avenger of blood is going to kill him. He's going to go through a trial. And so I find it so neat that there are cities on the east side. There's 3 on the east. We'll show a great map in a second. And 3 cities on the west side. Meaning, if you remember, 2.5 tribes were outside the promised land, but God still had graciousness to make sure that there was refuge on the east side where they were outside of God's will. And so, chapter 35, the cities of refuge are all about the sanctity of life. I mean, it's just all about the sanctity of life. You're like, well, what? How do you get there? It was the sanctity of life for the killer to make sure that he was going to be treated fair. And it was the sanctity of life for the one that was killed to make sure justice was going to take place. God is a God that cares about the sanctity of life, whether young or old, all the way through. And you can extrapolate that to all the places you know to extrapolate it. Ultimately, Jesus raised the bar on this concept of murder and the cities of refuge. In Matthew 5:21 through 22, he said, "You have heard that it was said to those of old." That was a rabbinical saying. When a rabbi would teach, he would start out with that. You've heard it said the days of old. But he added something in here that they never talked about. "You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you is what he added. Rabbis didn't do that. I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire." I know that's kind of scary, right? So Jesus isn't saying you're going to go to hell if you call somebody a fool, especially on Central Expressway. He's not saying that. Ultimately what he's saying is that this is worthy to die a death in hell. For the wages of sin are death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ. And so that's what we look for. What he's talking about here, Jesus, is this is a matter of heart. This is saying you need to respect people. This is raising the bar. It's not just about respecting life. It's about respecting the whole human for what he is. Ross Perot had this enormous imprint on my life. And he said, inside every person is something that says, I'm unique, I'm special. Don't treat me like a commodity. Treat me with respect. And so that's what Jesus is actually talking about here. Literally, your heart is supposed to look at people and treat them with respect. Ultimately, the extrapolation is we're the cities of refuge. We're supposed to treat people like that and lead people there. Make sense? All right, next.
But if he pushed him suddenly without enmity, or hurled anything on him without lying in wait, or used a stone that could cause death, and without seeing him, dropped it on him, so that he died, though he was not his enemy and did not seek his harm, then the congregation shall judge between the manslayer and the avenger of blood in accordance with these rules. And the congregation shall rescue the manslayer from the hand of the avenger of blood, and the congregation shall restore him to his city of refuge, to which he fled, and he shall live in it until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the holy oil. But if the manslayer shall at any time go beyond the boundaries of his city of refuge to which he fled, and the avenger of blood finds him outside of the boundaries of his city of refuge, and the avenger of blood kills the manslayer, he shall not be guilty of blood. For he must remain in his city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer may return to the land of his possession. And these things shall be for a statute and rule, and for you throughout your generations in all your dwelling places. If anyone kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the evidence of witnesses, but no person shall be put to death on the testimony of one witness. Moreover, you shall accept no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall be put to death. And you shall accept no ransom for him who has fled to his city of refuge, that he may return to dwell in the land before the death of the high priest. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the people of Israel.
Another great picture. So ultimately, you could have refuge. People would, the priest, the people of God would protect you and provide refuge. But ultimate salvation only came when the high priest died. Isn't that awesome? I mean, what a great, great picture. The Jews look at that and they're like, what does that point to? What does that point to? And what they've come up with is that they believe that everyone was just so heart-stricken over the loss of the high priest that they forgot about any things that had gone on. Ultimately, it's pointing to Christ, which is so cool. And you look at the names. So the names on the east side of the Jordan: Golan, Passage; Ramoth Gilead, Heights; Bezer, Gold; or Remote Fortress; Kadesh, Sanctuary; Shechem, Shoulder; Hebron, Friend. And all of them, to me, reference Jesus. Heights, him being a king; Gold, right? Him being our remote fortress; him being our sanctuary; him being someone's shoulder that we lean on. And look at those cities, even those in the outside the promised land on the east side, had access to refuge. Hebrews 6:18-19 refers to this. It says, so that by two unchangeable things, and I've included, this is Russell Freeman language, not God language. Two unchangeable things, God's promise and his oath, which is impossible for God to lie. We who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. I mean, everything in this points to Christ. Everything. All right. Now let's go to 5 angry women. Our chief angry woman.
That's right. We'll see how this goes. The heads of the father's house of the clans of the people of Gilead, and the son of Micher, the son of Manasseh, from the clans of the people of Joseph, came near and spoke before Moses and before the chiefs, the heads of the fathers' houses of the people of Israel. They said, the Lord commanded my Lord to give the land for inheritance by lot to the people of Israel. And my Lord was commanded by the Lord to give the inheritance of Zelophehad, our brother, to his daughters. But if they are married to any of the sons of the other tribes of the people of Israel, then their inheritance will be taken from them, from the inheritance of the fathers, and added to the inheritance of the tribes into which they marry. Okay, that's okay. Then it will be taken away from the lots of our inheritance. And when the Jubilee of the people of Israel comes, then their inheritance will be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry. And their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of the tribe of our fathers. And Moses commanded the people of Israel according to the word of the Lord, saying, the tribe of Israel of Joseph is right. This is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. Let them marry whom they think best. Only they shall marry within the clan of the tribe of their father. The inheritance of the people of Israel shall not be transferred from one tribe to another, and for every one of the people of Israel shall hold on to the inheritance of the tribe of his fathers. And every daughter who possesses an inheritance in any tribe of the people of Israel shall be wife to one of the clan of the tribe of her father, so that every one of the people of Israel may possess the inheritance of his fathers. So no inheritance shall be transferred from one tribe to another, for each of the tribes of the people of Israel shall hold on to its own inheritance. The daughters of Zelophehad did as the Lord commanded Moses, for Mala, Tirzah, Hogla, Milcah and Noah and the daughters of Zelophehad were married to the sons of their father's brothers. But what if they didn't love them? They were married into the clans of the people of Manasseh, the sons of Joseph, and their inheritance remained in the tribe of their father's clan. These are the commandments and rules of the Lord that the Lord commanded through Moses to the people of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. Not very fair for those women if they love someone out of their clan, just so you know.
All right. So this goes back to Numbers 27. And as they're going to divide up the land, these 5 sisters are hacked off and they go stomping up to the front of the tent of meeting to Moses and Eleazar, the high priest, and they're mad and they say, this is not fair. It's not fair that we don't have brothers to inherit our land when we go over. And so Moses is like, okay, whoa, ease up. He does. It is exactly what happened. God speaks to me. God speaks to me. No, they're not. They're hacked off and mad. And so I live with a woman. I know this. And so literally, Moses is like, let me go ask God. He goes to ask the Lord, and the Lord says, the daughters are right. See, the daughters are right. And so when you go over, you can marry anyone you want. It just has to be in this enormous tribe. You've got thousands and thousands of men to choose from. You can marry anyone you want, but the land is sacred in Israel. Did you know today 93% of the land of Israel is still owned by the state? It's not passed because in Leviticus 25, it says, you shall not pass the land in perpetuity. And then when it refers to the Jubilee, the land is supposed to go back to the rightful owner. Jubilee was every 50 years, and slaves are set free, and debt is forgiven, and the land goes back to the rightful owner. But if a woman marries another tribe, that land goes into his tribe. It's not going to be freed in Jubilee. That's what he's saying. And so they had to marry in the tribe to keep Jubilee, to keep the land in one tribe. The Jews, my colleagues that I work with and I constantly taunt, make up stuff, right? They make up stuff. The Talmud's 38 volumes of stuff made up. And so they look at this Jubilee and that concept of forgiving debt. They're like, I don't like that. I don't want to give up my debt. And they put it under the guise, make fun of them. They put it under the guise, well, if you have to forgive debt, then no one's going to loan to poor people. So therefore, we've got to develop a workaround. I'm like, right, sure. So what they do is they believe that a debt that is owed to to the synagogue or to the temple is not a debt that's forgiven. And so what they do right before Jubilee, they assign their debt, although they'll still be the one to collect it. It's called Prusbul. Prusbul will allow them to assign the debt. Technically, the synagogue actually owns it, but they'll collect in their worker. I don't even know why I'm off on this. This has nothing to do with anything, but Jubilee wouldn't have freed the land. There's several things about, even though you're disrespecting God's word, and you're in our prayers, there's several things about this. Number one, they felt free to go to the tent of meeting and challenge Moses, who is a man after God, right? And Eleazar, the high priest. They felt comfortable going to do that. Number two, God provided that they could actually own land, and Jewish women could buy and sell, and they were treated as total equals. And they got to choose who they wanted to marry. This wasn't arranged marriages. They made the choice. Even though the Jews make stuff up, the rabbinical writers look at the 5 daughters of Zelophehad, and they think that they are wise and virtuous because they were able to override the breaches of man. Meaning man made up these rules and they were bad. And these women approached the leaders to get it fixed. And women have been doing that for 3,000 years, fixing men's mess ups. And so they highly regard these 5 daughters. So we come to the end. These are the commandments and the rules that the Lord commanded through Moses to the people of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. I didn't do deep soul searching. But I put my takeaways as I've gone through this. First of all, it is amazing how detailed Exodus and Numbers are, from the design of the high priest to the tabernacle, to last week, the boundaries, to the 42 cities that are listed. It's amazing that God is such a God of details and trust. It's clear from this that we are called to trust God. When they see these giants, there's only 2 that trust God. They see the giants and it clouds their vision for what God's intent was for them. And providence, time after time after time, even when they're griping, he's providing water, he's providing quail, sometimes until it comes out their nostrils, as we know. He's providing protection. When they're following his will, he is providing strength in war. Remember Moses holding the staff up? God is providing everything. Obedience. We see in here that the price for a lack of obedience, he does have consequences. I mean, an entire generation was condemned to wandering in the wilderness. Refuge. He absolutely provides refuge for all of us. He is the sanctuary. He is the shoulder. He is the fortress. And then I love that verse from Exodus. This is when Moses asked God to show him his face. This God is hiding Moses in the cleft of a rock, and he wants Moses to know who he is. And he says this: the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. So we're done with Numbers and we're into the New Testament. Next week, 1 Thessalonians. Any questions, thoughts on Numbers? All right. You're on.
All right, Doug, you look like you have something to say or someplace to go. Anything? You're throwing me off. You're usually back there. What are you doing right there? Okay. All right, let's go to Lord in prayer. I don't know if I can trust Doug or not. Let's close our eyes. All right, dear Heavenly Father, thank you for just your care for us. And thank you for Russell and his dedication and hours and hours studying your word and cutting it up and slicing it up and bringing it back to us in a way that we can understand. We thank you very much for that. Lord, I just pray for everyone here today and all the prayer requests that have been shared. You love us, you care for us, you show us that each and every day. And I'm just glad for our group of believers that are sitting here today that we can honor you, hopefully in everything that we say and do. In Christ's name, amen. Y'all have a good week.